Now let's talk about operating leverage. But first, we have to describe what a cost structure for a company is. The cost structure of a company is the proportion of fixed costs to their variable costs. This relationship is important because, depending on the cost structure, small changes in the business's environment could have a substantial impact on profits. For example, a company with large fixed costs in proportion to its variable costs is more risky, especially during downturns in its sales. But as sales increase, companies with high fixed costs in proportion to variable costs also have the opportunity for greater rewards in the form of surging profits compared to a company that has low fixed costs in proportion to variable costs. Companies can predict the expected change in operating income due to a change in sales volume based on their cost structure. Operating leverage predicts the effects that fixed costs will have on changes in operating income when sales volume changes. Using two different companies with different cost structures, one with high fixed costs, the other with low fixed costs, I'll show you how they are affected differently by the same exact change in sales. These two companies both offer horse and carriage rides in South Carolina. There are only two differences between the companies. The first company has high fixed costs in proportion to its variable costs. Fixed costs are $6,000, and the variable cost is what they charge each passenger, $5 per passenger. The second company has low fixed costs in proportion to their variable costs. Their fixed costs are only $1,000, but their variable costs are $15 per passenger. Everything else about the companies is the same. Both companies charge $25 per person per tour, and both companies expect to provide tours to 500 passengers in September. So using the data from the previous slide, I'll now create an expected contribution margin income statement. It's called expected because it's based on the amount of sales the companies expect to have. On the next slide, we'll find out what really happened. The first thing in our expected contribution margin income statement is the revenue they expect to have. Both companies expected 500 passengers at $25 per passenger. This gives each company $12,500 in sales revenue. We then have to subtract the variable costs. First, we'll calculate it for the company with a high fixed costs, HFC for short. Their variable cost is only $5 per passenger, so multiplying that by 500 passengers gives us $2,500 of variable costs. Now the low fixed cost company has a variable cost of $15 per passenger. They also expect 500 passengers, which gives them $7,500 of variable costs. Next is contribution margin. Remember, to calculate it, you have to take your sales revenue and subtract the variable costs. So that gives the high fixed cost company $10,000 of contribution margin, while the low fixed cost company has $5,000 of contribution margin. Next, we subtract fixed costs. We previously said the high fixed cost company has $6,000 of fixed costs, while the low fixed cost company has only $1,000 of fixed costs. Lastly, we have operating income, which is the contribution margin minus fixed costs. Doing the math, we get $4,000 of operating income for both companies. Now, on the previous slide, I created an income statement based on what the companies expected. But in reality, bad weather set in for the month, and instead of 500 passengers, they actually had only 400 passengers. Now we'll do an actual contribution margin income statement. It's called actual because it's based on the amount of sales the company actually had. Now remember, the company with a higher fixed cost has greater risk. So when sales drop, their profit should drop more than for a company with low fixed costs. Let's see if that's what really happens. The first thing on our contribution margin income statement is the revenue they expect to have. Both companies only had 400 passengers at $25 per passenger. This gives each company only $10,000 in sales revenue. We then have to subtract the variable costs. First, we'll calculate it for the company with a high fixed costs, HFC for short. Their variable cost is only $5 per passenger, so multiplying that by 400 passengers gives us $2,000 of variable costs. Now, the low fixed cost company has variable costs of $15 per passenger. They also only had 400 passengers, which gives them $6,000 of variable costs. Next is the contribution margin, and to calculate that, you take your sales revenue and subtract your variable costs. So that gives the high fixed cost company $8,000 of contribution margin, while the low fixed cost company has $4,000 of contribution margin. Next, we subtract fixed costs. We previously said the high fixed cost company had $6,000 of fixed costs, while the low fixed cost company has only $1,000 of fixed costs. Lastly, we have operating income, which is contribution margin minus fixed costs. Doing the math, we only get $2,000 of operating income for the company with high fixed costs and $3,000 of operating income for the company with a low fixed costs. So on the next slide, we'll compare the expected outcome to the actual outcome. So now we're looking at both the expected income statement and the actual income statement. The only differences were, instead of 500 passengers they expected, both companies only had 400 passengers due to the poor weather. The other difference is one company has high fixed costs in proportion to variable costs than the other company. So let's look at the bottom line. Both companies expected to have $4,000 of operating income. But in reality, the high fixed cost company had only $2,000 of operating income, and the low fixed cost company saw its operating income only drop to $3,000. So we proved that cost structure matters. High fixed cost companies will take more of a hit to profit when sales drop when compared to a low fixed cost company. So high fixed cost companies are riskier. However, if sales increase to 600 instead of 500, the high fixed cost company would have seen its profits grow more than the low fixed cost company. For practice, you can plug in the numbers to see for yourself. So now back to operating leverage. One of management's goals is to predict the expected change in operating income due to a change in sales volume based on the company's cost structure. They do this using operating leverage. Operating leverage predicts the effects that fixed costs have on changes in operating income when sales volume changes. Also, the degree of operating leverage is the ratio that measures the effect that fixed costs have on changes in operating income when sales volume changes. The formula for operating leverage is contribution margin divided by operating income. Let's calculate it for the company with a high fixed cost using the expected income statement. Then we'll see how to use the result. Now we just need to plug in the numbers. Contribution margin was $10,000. Then we divide by operating income of $4,000. The result is 2.50 or 2.5. But what does that mean? For the company with a high fixed cost, its 2.50 result means that the percentage change in operating income will be 2.5 times the percentage change in sales volume. In other words, if sales increase 1%, operating income would increase 2.5%. The formula for calculating this is percentage change in sales times degree of operating leverage equals the percentage change in operating income. As I mentioned before, a 1% change in sales, either up or down, equals a 2.5% change in operating income in the same direction. So answer this question. A 20% change in sales would result in what percent change in operating income for this company? It would result in a 50% change in operating income. And that's exactly what happened to the company with a high fixed cost, as we'll show you on the next slide. Now I'll bring in the income statement with the actual results. The income statement up top had the expected results. So the first question is, how much did sales drop from the first income statement to the second? Sales dropped by $2,500. Next question, what percentage change was that? The percentage change is the amount of change divided by the original amount of $12,500 for percentage change of 20%. Flashing back to the previous slide, we said a 20% change in sales would result in a 50% change in operating income due to the company's cost structure having a degree of operating leverage of 2.5. That's exactly what we have in our two income statements. Sales dropped 20%, which led to a 50% change in operating income. So that was a long way to go to prove that operating leverage helps to predict the expected change in operating income due to a change in sales volume based on the company's cost structure. But from now on, we can just use this simple formula to do it for us.